In the summer of 1780, one man came closer to destroying the American Revolution than any British army ever had, and he was the most decorated battlefield hero the Continental Army had ever produced. His name was Benedict Arnold, and for a brief, terrible season, he held the fate of a newborn nation entirely in his hands, and chose, deliberately and for money, to crush it. He was born in 1741 in Norwich, Connecticut, into a family that had once known prosperity and respect. His father, a merchant of some standing, had collapsed into alcoholism with a quiet devastation that rearranged everything. The family's savings disappeared. Their reputation collapsed publicly, in the small, unforgiving way that only a small town can accomplish. Young Benedict was pulled from school before he could finish and apprenticed to an apothecary, watching the world around him conclude that he was nobody. History would record what he did with that conclusion. He spent the rest of his life, on both sides of the war, trying to prove it wrong, and the hunger to prove it drove him toward both his greatest glories and his ultimate ruin. By the time the first shots of the Revolution fired at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, Arnold had rebuilt himself into something formidable. He was a prosperous merchant and sea captain, hardened by trade routes to the Caribbean, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had clawed back everything he once lost. When news of the battles reached him, he didn't deliberate. He marched his militia company north immediately, demanding powder and ammunition from the Connecticut authorities with a forcefulness that left the room slightly stunned. This was the temperament that would either win a revolution or shatter one. That spring, it would do the former. Within weeks, Arnold and the Vermont frontiersman Ethan Allen had seized Fort Ticonderoga from a British garrison barely awake enough to resist. The fort's cannons, nearly 60 of them, would later be dragged through the snow to Boston, where their sudden appearance above the city forced the British fleet to evacuate without firing a shot. Then that autumn, Arnold undertook one of the most audacious military operations in American history, a march of over 1,000 soldiers through the wilderness of Maine, through swamps and storms and starvation, aimed at capturing Quebec and pulling all of Canada into the Revolution. The assault on New Year's Eve 1775 failed against the city's walls in a driving blizzard. Arnold was shot through the leg. He refused to be taken from the field and continued directing men from the snow with a wound that would have ended most men's wars entirely. He was 34 years old. He had not yet even begun. What followed in the next 2 years was a catalog of actions that should have made Benedict Arnold the most celebrated figure of the Revolution. He commanded a makeshift fleet on Lake Champlain in 1776, delaying a massive British invasion long enough to save the Northern Campaign. When a British force raided his home state of Connecticut in April 1777, he rode alone into the path of their retreat, rallied a collapsing American force, and fought a rearguard action until the horse beneath him was shot and fell, trapping his leg. And then came Saratoga, the battle that changed the entire war. In October 1777, as British General John Burgoyne pushed south with a disciplined army meant to split the American states in two, it was Arnold who read the terrain, found the gaps in the British line, and drove his men into positions that reversed the battle's momentum. On October 7th, at the climactic engagement on Bemis Heights, his own command had been stripped from him by the jealous General Horatio Gates. It did not matter. Arnold rode into the fighting without orders, through open gunfire, rallying regiments that were not his, and leading the charge that shattered Burgoyne's left flank. A musket ball tore through his left leg, the same leg wounded at Quebec. Burgoyne surrendered 10 days later. France recognized the United States and entered the war. The Revolution was saved, and the man most responsible for saving it lay in a hospital bed, listening to Horatio Gates receive the congratulations of the Continental Congress. Congress had passed Arnold over for promotion to Major General in February 1777, elevating 5 men who had accomplished a fraction of what he had. They restored his rank only grudgingly after Ridgefield, and even then refused to restore his seniority. The court-martial they later staged against him on charges of financial impropriety, some legitimate, some manufactured by political enemies, ended with a formal public reprimand from George Washington, who privately considered the entire proceeding an injustice. Washington understood Arnold's value with a precision that Congress never matched, but the reprimand had landed. The damage was done. Something in Benedict Arnold had broken open, and what filled the space would doom them all. He married Margaret Shippen in April 1779. She was 18. He was 38. She was the daughter of a prominent Philadelphia family with strong Loyalist sympathies, educated and sharp and connected. During the British occupation of Philadelphia, she had socialized with British officers, including a charming and well-born major named John André, who was the chief intelligence officer for British General Henry Clinton in New York. Whether Peggy actively initiated what came next, historians still debate. What is not in dispute is that within weeks of their wedding, Benedict Arnold made his first covert contact with the British. His code name was Monk, chosen after the English general who had restored the monarchy in 1660 by switching sides. The name was not chosen carelessly. His handler was André himself, communicating through carefully worded letters passed through civilian intermediaries. For over a year, Arnold fed the British information and negotiated terms. He maneuvered to receive command of West Point, the fortress on the Hudson River, whose loss would sever New England from the southern states and effectively split the Revolution in half. He asked for £20,000, roughly equivalent to $3 million today, plus a British commission, in exchange for the fort and the garrison inside it. General Clinton agreed. On the night of September 21, 1780, Arnold rowed out onto the Hudson River and met John André in person, hidden in the darkness below West Point. They spoke for hours. Before dawn, Arnold handed André 6 detailed documents: troop strengths, artillery positions, the full defensive layout of West Point, hidden inside André's stocking. When daylight made a river crossing impossible, André rode south in civilian clothing, carrying papers that could end a revolution. On September 23rd, 3 American militiamen stopped a traveler near Tarrytown, New York. His name, he said, was John Anderson. When they searched him and found the papers, Major John André's composure finally broke. What happened in the 48 hours that followed was a race between a letter and a horseman. News of André's capture moved northward. Arnold was at breakfast with his officers at his headquarters, the Robinson House, when the messenger arrived. Among his breakfast guests, by the precise cruelty of timing, were several of George Washington's aides, including Alexander Hamilton. Washington himself was on his way. Arnold excused himself quietly, went upstairs, told his wife what had happened, and then rowed hard for the Hudson. He reached the river, commandeered a boat, and was rowed out to the British warship HMS Vulture, the same vessel that had brought André up the river days before. He never set foot on American soil again. Washington arrived at the Robinson House less than an hour later. He read the dispatches confirming everything. He walked through the empty rooms of a man he had trusted and defended. Hamilton later recorded that Washington turned to the officers around him, visibly shaken, and said that Arnold had betrayed them, and asked whom now any of them could trust. Peggy Arnold, meanwhile, staged a performance of such convincing hysterical innocence that Washington and his staff believed her entirely and let her go. Historians now believe she was a knowing participant in the conspiracy from nearly the beginning. John André was tried by a military court on September 29th and found guilty of espionage. He was hanged 4 days later at Tappan, New York. He was 30 years old. American officers who witnessed his execution noted his composure and dignity, and even his captors found it difficult not to grieve for him. He asked to be shot rather than hanged. A soldier's death rather than a spy's. The request was denied. He tied his own blindfold and placed the noose around his own neck with his own hands. History has never stopped feeling the weight of that moment. The man who sent him to the gallows lived for 20 more years. Arnold led British raids against Virginia, and then, in September 1781, against his own home state of Connecticut. The attack on New London burned the town to ash and ended in the massacre of surrendered American soldiers at Fort Griswold, a horror that trailed his name like smoke. After the war, Britain never fully embraced him. He tried to rebuild in London, then in St. John, New Brunswick, where colonists burned him in effigy and set fire to his warehouse. He returned to England, failed in business, fought legal battles until the end, and died in London in June 1801. Largely forgotten, in considerable debt, estranged from a legacy he could never escape in a country he could never return to. He was 59 years old. At the Saratoga battlefield today, a monument stands on the precise ground where the war's turning point was decided. It honors the anonymous officer who was wounded there in the decisive charge. A carved stone boot mounted on a marble pedestal. The inscription gives the date, describes the battle, and acknowledges the officer's contribution. It does not give his name. It will never give his name. That small, deliberate omission may be the most honest monument in American history, honoring the sacrifice while refusing to honor the man, because the man who saved the revolution was the same man who tried to sell it. Benedict Arnold proved something the founders never wanted to believe, that a nation's greatest danger can come not from its enemies, but from the heroes it fails to see.